Most people believe they are unique thinkers. The reality, they recycle thoughts like old newspapers. True originality is rare, so rare that when it shows up, it unsettles. If your mind is built differently, you'll recognize it not in compliments, but in misunderstandings. Let's look at 8 signs your mind belongs to the 1% that others simply cannot decode. Most people navigate life as though it were a series of isolated snapshots. They wake up, read the headlines, react, complain, scroll further, react again. Each event is treated as a stand-alone occurrence, self-contained, without roots or branches. To them, a stock market crash is a shocking catastrophe, a sudden storm with no warning. To you, it is simply the release of pressure that had been building in the pipes for years. This difference is not minor. It is the essential fracture between minds that merely observe and minds that truly understand. When you see patterns, you begin to notice that nothing is ever random, not in the sense people use the word. Every small decision, every policy, every technological invention, every personal action contributes to larger shapes. Events are merely the surface. The structure lies beneath. Imagine 2 people standing on a beach. A wave comes in. The first person says, "The sea is angry today." The second person notices the tide chart, the pull of the moon, the shifting winds. For one, it is a surprise. For the other, it was inevitable. That second person, the pattern seer, may appear detached, even cold, but it is not detachment. It is simply a higher altitude of perception. Most minds, when confronted with a political scandal, will limit themselves to the scandal itself, the guilty faces, the dramatic downfall, the entertainment value. The pattern-minded individual asks what structural incentives produce this behavior. Who benefits from pretending to be shocked? What conditions guarantee we will see this story repeated, only with different names? The same lens applies to daily life. Where others see a friend suddenly changing, you notice the accumulation of small compromises, the gradual erosion of values, the slow creep of fatigue or ambition. You rarely say, "I didn't see that coming," because in truth you almost always did. Not because you possess psychic powers, but because you were paying attention to the pattern long before the event erupted into visibility. This mode of perception is unsettling to others. They want their surprises. They want to believe that today's crisis is unique, that history bends around them in special ways. They dislike the suggestion that today's uproar is only yesterday's logic playing itself out. To them, you sound cynical. To you, it is simply clarity. The ability to see patterns means you cannot consume information in the same way as the majority. Headlines lose their power. Trends matter more than stories. You are less interested in what happened than in how often it happens and under what conditions it must happen again. When most people panic, you shrug. When most people celebrate a sudden success, you measure its durability. Pattern recognition is not a talent that wins instant friends. It isolates. Nobody enjoys being told that their breaking news is just another rerun of an old play. Yet, once you train your eye to see the hidden architecture, you can never return to blindness. Events dissolve into signals, signals arrange themselves into sequences, sequences reveal the design. For most people, silence is unbearable. They reach for the television remote, fill the room with music, check their phone, hum a tune, anything to create a distraction. Quiet feels like an empty hallway they must run through quickly, afraid of what might echo back. But to you, silence is not absence, it is space. It is a laboratory where ideas stretch out, bump into one another, recombine. Where others panic in the quiet, you lean into it, because you know that the richest parts of thought are never born in noise. Look around any public place. People are terrified of the slightest pause. The moment the train stops, phones appear. The instant the meeting ends, chatter begins. At a dinner table, if conversation dips for even a few seconds, someone coughs up a joke, a headline, a trivial anecdote. Silence is treated as failure, as though words are oxygen and the lack of them a suffocation. Yet in truth, silence is the very condition in which depth becomes possible. Without it, every thought stays shallow, bobbing on the surface, never descending. You are different because you recognize silence as an ally. You do not need to patch over every gap with words. You do not fear the pause between questions and answers. In fact, you wait longer than most people find comfortable because you know thought requires incubation. Where others rush to fill the vacuum, you allow it to expand. That expansion unnerves them. They suspect you are judging or plotting or bored. They cannot understand that silence for you is not empty time, it is fertile ground. Consider how most conversations unfold. They are not exchanges of meaning but competitions for airtime. One person speaks, the other waits impatiently to reply, neither truly listening, both terrified of silence hanging in the air. You disrupt this rhythm by embracing stillness. You let a question rest. You let words sink in. Sometimes you don't answer at all, and this unsettles people who crave constant affirmation that they are being heard. They confuse silence with rejection, when in reality it is respect. You're giving their words room to breathe, to echo, to settle into shape. There is also the private realm of silence, the solitude of an empty room, the hush of early morning, the long drive without the radio. Most people run from these moments because they bring unwanted confrontations with the self. In silence, the inner monologue grows louder, the questions sharpen, the unresolved conflicts demand attention. To sit with silence is to sit with oneself, and that is precisely why so many avoid it. But you lean into it. You treat silence as a conversation with your own mind, not an enemy, but an interlocutor. This relationship with silence changes the way you move through the world. Where others grow restless without stimulation, you grow sharper. Where they interpret a pause as awkward, you treat it as natural. Silence does not threaten your identity, it shapes it. Most people crave certainty as if it were a lifeline. They cling to clear answers, neat labels, and absolute truths. The world is overwhelming, and certainty offers the illusion of control. It is comforting to know without question that something is right or wrong, that a belief is unshakable, that a path is guaranteed to succeed. But the moment you start to question certainty, to examine its roots, to treat it as provisional rather than absolute, the majority sees you as strange, indecisive, or even dangerous. You instinctively understand that certainty is rarely a reflection of reality. It is a social construct, a mental shortcut, a way to save energy in a world that is infinitely complex. Every decision, every prediction, every statement about the future carries with it uncertainty. People who claim otherwise are usually ignoring inconvenient data, suppressing doubts, or simply repeating what they have been told. You, on the other hand, see the nuance, the contingencies, the probabilities that others refuse to acknowledge. Distrusting certainty means that you treat every conclusion as temporary. You rarely accept the first explanation you hear. When experts speak, you listen carefully but remain skeptical. When conventional wisdom dominates, you investigate the assumptions it is built on. You are aware that what seems indisputable today often collapses tomorrow, and that truths are contextual, conditional, and evolving. To the certainty-addicted majority, this mindset appears unnecessarily complicated or even reckless because they value comfort over accuracy. This distrust extends to your own thinking. You question your biases, examine your impulses, and test your judgments against multiple scenarios. You know that confidence is not proof, and that conviction can be a trap when it blinds you to evidence. While others treat doubt as weakness, you recognize it as the cornerstone of clarity. You understand that the sharpest minds are not those that claim to have all the answers, but those that relentlessly interrogate the questions. In conversations, this approach makes you unusual. You challenge assumptions that everyone else accepts without hesitation. You ask questions others avoid, probe contradictions others overlook, and insist on examining evidence rather than repeating slogans. People may call you difficult, negative, or pedantic, but you are merely refusing to accept the comfort of certainty. You know that answers offered too quickly are rarely trustworthy, and that clarity emerges only from careful scrutiny. Distrusting certainty also shapes your decisions and actions. You plan with contingencies, hedge against hidden risks, and expect surprises. You are less swayed by hype, persuasion, or charisma because you recognize that certainty can be manufactured to manipulate perception. Where others act impulsively on what must be true, you move cautiously, methodically, aware of the unknowns that most minds ignore. You live in hypotheses, not dogmas, and your thinking is a landscape of probabilities rather than absolutes. This mindset isolates you from people who equate confidence with competence. They mistake your skepticism for indecision. They mistake your questions for defiance. They mistake your patience for passivity. But to you, certainty is always provisional, a temporary lens for understanding rather than a foundation for belief. And the refusal to accept it as final is what keeps your mind sharp. In today's world, speed is worshipped as though it were intelligence. People boast about multitasking, rapid responses, constant connectivity, and instant reactions. Social media rewards the swift, the impulsive, and the superficial. A headline is read in 3 seconds, a tweet digested in 1, a summary judged as if it were a full report. To most minds, speed equals competence, efficiency, and progress. But you understand that velocity rarely produces insight, depth does. You are uncomfortable with shortcuts. You know that understanding a complex problem cannot be compressed into a single glance, a quick answer, or a catchy phrase. While others skim the surface, you explore layers, trace connections, and investigate the foundations of what appears obvious. Where speed prioritizes completion, depth prioritizes comprehension. You recognize that a shallow understanding is more dangerous than ignorance because it gives the illusion of knowledge while concealing error. This mindset affects the way you consume information. A book is read slowly with attention to detail, annotation, and reflection. A problem is dissected, reconstructed, and challenged before a conclusion is accepted. You prefer fewer interactions but with substance, fewer conversations but with resonance, fewer projects but with genuine mastery. The world views this approach as tedious or unnecessary because patience is undervalued in an era that measures productivity by volume rather than quality. You notice how many people treat attention as expendable. They split focus among countless tasks. Half listen to conversations, scroll while eating, respond without considering. You see the cost of such dispersal: missed patterns, shallow reasoning, fragmented memory, and decisions built on partial information. You do the opposite. You cultivate single-minded concentration, protecting your mental space as if it were rare real estate. And you measure progress not by speed, but by clarity, resilience, and depth. This preference for depth also shapes your creative and strategic thinking. While others rush to publish ideas, you wait until they are refined, tested, and integrated. While the crowd reacts to every trend, you observe the long-term forces at work, resisting the temptation of immediate gratification. While many chase popularity, novelty, or immediate results, you prioritize significance, insight, and durability. Your pace is deliberate, and it allows connections to emerge that remain invisible to those who prioritize velocity over understanding. Relationships, too, are approached with depth rather than quantity. You invest in a few individuals, explore the layers of their character, and engage in conversations that challenge and expand your perspective. Superficial interactions feel draining or meaningless because your mind seeks substance rather than noise. You recognize that mastery in any field, whether intellectual, professional, or artistic, requires patience, iteration, and sustained effort. Depth changes your perception of achievement. While others celebrate rapid wins, temporary victories, or short-term recognition, you focus on the cumulative value of persistent effort, careful study, and thoughtful engagement. You understand that slow, deliberate progress is rarely noticed but often irreversible, and that true understanding emerges only when time and attention are fully devoted to the complexity beneath the surface. Most people spend enormous energy trying to fit in, to explain themselves, to translate their thoughts into language that others can immediately grasp. Misunderstanding feels like failure, a personal slight, or proof of inadequacy. They twist their words, alter their tone, and suppress complexity to meet the comfort level of others. You, on the other hand, are different. You are comfortable being misunderstood because you know that clarity is not always a function of language or proximity, and that the rarest truths often require space, patience, and interpretation to be recognized. This comfort begins with an awareness that most minds are not prepared for nuance. Ideas travel more easily in the shallow currents of simplicity than in the deep rivers of layered thought. Most people want conclusions neatly packaged, moral judgments instantly delivered, and patterns compressed into single-sentence takeaways. When you introduce complexity, question assumptions, or point out contradictions, you are often met with confusion, frustration, or resistance. You do not apologize for this because you understand that the problem lies not in your thinking, but in their expectation of simplicity. Being comfortable with misunderstanding also allows you to think independently. You are not bound by the immediate approval of peers, colleagues, or society. You do not change your position because someone fails to grasp your reasoning or labels it as wrong. You are aware that truly original ideas rarely land without friction. The more unconventional or counterintuitive the insight, the more likely it is to provoke skepticism or dismissal. You treat these reactions as natural consequences rather than threats to your credibility. This mindset influences your communication. You may speak deliberately, allowing pauses for reflection, or use language that challenges conventional expectations. People may interpret this as aloofness, arrogance, or indifference, but in reality, it is a strategy of precision. You are willing to sacrifice immediate comprehension for the sake of integrity in thought. You tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood because you know that the rare listener who truly engages with your ideas will emerge not from the crowd, but from those willing to think deeply themselves. In relationships, this approach creates distance, but also authenticity. You do not bend your identity to meet the comfort levels of others. You are honest about your intentions, your curiosity, and your doubts, even if they are misread. Many will misinterpret your patience, your skepticism, or your silence, but you accept this as part of the natural friction between complex thought and shallow perception. The moments when misunderstanding fades, when ideas resonate, when insight is recognized become far more meaningful than the constant validation sought by others. Being comfortable with misunderstanding also shapes your internal landscape. You are less prone to anxiety over approval, less distracted by social expectation, and less likely to abandon a line of thought because it initially provokes resistance. You learn to tolerate the gap between intention and perception, recognizing it as a necessary dimension of intellectual independence. In this space, thought flourishes, curiosity deepens, and ideas develop resilience precisely because they are tested against misunderstanding, scrutiny, and friction. Most people approach life as though every offer, opportunity, or decision comes without hidden consequences. They celebrate free promotions, easy solutions, and safety shortcuts without considering what is sacrificed behind the scenes. A deal appears attractive because it is simple, convenient, or immediate, and they embrace it with enthusiasm, unaware of the costs that are embedded, invisible, or deferred. You, however, notice what is hidden. You see the trade-offs that others ignore, the compromises that accompany every benefit, and the shadows that follow even the brightest promises. This ability starts with observation. Where others see only the surface, what is offered, what is gained, what is visible, you examine what is lost time, energy, attention, freedom, and long-term options. Every choice carries consequences, some immediate and some delayed, some personal and some systemic. You train yourself to detect these subtle forces, to map the chain of effects that most people assume do not exist. This makes you cautious in ways that others interpret as hesitation, risk aversion, or overthinking. Spotting invisible trade-offs also changes your relationship with incentives. The world constantly presents signals designed to manipulate attention and desire. Free apps harvest personal data. Quick loans extract hidden fees. Social validation requires ongoing effort and compromises authenticity. Most people follow the bright lure without noticing the strings attached. You instinctively ask, what is the hidden cost? And you know that the apparent ease of a decision is rarely the full picture. This awareness allows you to make choices that others will regret or overlook while avoiding pitfalls that remain invisible until too late. Your perception of trade-offs extends to human behavior and social interaction. You recognize that people's actions are rarely simple. Praise may come with expectation, help with obligation, agreement with manipulation. You anticipate the consequence of decisions, not only for yourself, but for the broader system in which you operate. Where most minds evaluate benefits superficially, you evaluate the network of cause and effect, the ripple that extends beyond immediate perception. This makes your judgment unusually accurate, though it also isolates you because most people prefer simplicity and immediacy over complex foresight. This skill manifests in planning, strategy, and risk assessment. You avoid temptations that appear beneficial but are costly in hidden ways. You invest time and energy where the long-term payoff outweighs superficial gains. You anticipate scenarios in which trade-offs manifest over months or years, not just days. You recognize that short-term gratification almost always carries a hidden price, and that most failures could be traced back to unexamined compromises. Spotting invisible trade-offs also shapes your mindset. You approach opportunities with skepticism, not cynicism. You treat incentives as clues, not guarantees. You measure the full architecture of decisions rather than the apparent value alone. You accept that complexity is the true constant in life, and that clarity requires seeing beyond what is presented. You are attuned to subtleties that escape the casual observer, and your decisions reflect an understanding that the world operates on layers that are not immediately visible. Most people evaluate truth through the lens of authority. A professor speaks, and the majority nods without question. A celebrity endorses, and millions follow blindly. A loud or confident person states an opinion, and it is accepted as fact. Authority becomes a shortcut for judgment, a mental crutch to avoid the effort of independent thinking. You, however, refuse to let hierarchy dictate your conclusions. You judge ideas on their own merit regardless of who presents them, and this refusal is unsettling to those who equate credibility with rank, title, or reputation. You understand that the source of an idea is rarely proof of its validity. A Nobel laureate may be wrong, a famous entrepreneur may be short-sighted, a charismatic politician may be deceptive. Conversely, the quiet thinker, the obscure writer, or the newcomer may offer insights that surpass conventional wisdom. By focusing on ideas instead of authorities, you develop a habit of critical evaluation that is rare because it requires more effort, discipline, and intellectual courage than simply following the consensus. This mindset begins with skepticism, not cynicism. You do not dismiss authorities outright, nor do you accept them without scrutiny. You assess evidence, analyze reasoning, and examine assumptions. You interrogate the logic of an argument independently of the speaker's reputation. People often mistake this approach for arrogance or contrarianism, but it is fundamentally a commitment to truth over social convenience, a refusal to surrender intellectual responsibility in exchange for reassurance or status. Judging ideas rather than authorities also reshapes how you consume information. Academic papers, media reports, and public statements are all filtered through your internal standard rather than external approval, where most readers skim abstracts or rely on citations as proof. You examine methodology, context, and coherence. You identify flaws that others overlook because they are dazzled by the prestige of the source, and you recognize breakthroughs hidden in unconventional forms that others dismiss as unimportant or irrelevant. In conversations and debates, this approach often isolates you. People expect you to defer to recognized figures, to echo popular opinions, to accept conclusions that are settled by consensus. When you challenge these assumptions, you may be met with resistance, hostility, or confusion. They interpret your independence as rebellion, whereas it is a disciplined adherence to logic, evidence, and the principle that ideas must stand on their own, irrespective of who presents them. This habit of mind shapes decision making and strategy in profound ways. You are less likely to be manipulated by charisma, intimidation, or prestige. You are better equipped to identify innovation, disruption, and underappreciated insight. You recognize patterns and connections that remain invisible to those who substitute authority for reasoning. Your judgment becomes a tool for clarity rather than conformity, allowing you to navigate complexity with precision, foresight, and autonomy. You learn to value substance over status, coherence over reputation, and evidence over applause. You understand that respect for authority is not inherently wrong, but blind deference is dangerous. You seek the truth embedded in ideas, the patterns hidden in arguments, and the principles that survive scrutiny. And this practice reshapes your thinking into a system that privileges insight over recognition,